You either won't believe or will believe all too well where New Orleans Saints head coach Dennis Allen was ranked amongst NFL head coaches by our Locked On national NFL experts. We had all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at what it is that makes the New Orleans Saints defense the New Orleans Saints defense. In our midweek fundamentals, we're going to break down the basics of what it is that separates the Saints defense from the rest of the NFL. We're going to take a look at how Demario Davis is the most pivotal veteran for the New Orleans Saints defensive success. I'll tell you why I believe that. And we're going to kick everything off with a look at where Dennis Allen was ranked by our Locked On NFL scouting national experts, Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs, a ranking that you're either going to be very surprised by or not surprised by at all. And even though he falls low on the list, it doesn't feel like the external perception matches the internal perception within the building. We appreciate you very much, as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed at GameTime. Terms apply. New Orleans Saints head coach Dennis Allen ranked 32 of 32 by Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs over at Locked On NFL Scouting, a ranking that either surprises you or doesn't surprise you in the slightest, depending upon which side of the Dennis Allen argument you fall on. And while that might be the public perception, it does not seem to match the internal perception of Dennis Allen and where he sits in terms of the heat of his seat going into 2024. So look, the guys over at Locked On NFL Scouting, which is the daily podcast that breaks down all of the biggest stories around the NFL from a team building, roster building, and general management perspective, definitely worth your time. Easy way to become a smarter football fan and know what's going on around the league every single day. They did a ranking of all 32 head coaches. They really kind of did them in tiers. And in the midst of doing them in tiers, they ranked Dennis Allen at effectively the bottom of the final tier in spot 32 of 32. There's no doubt about it. You can try to, sugarcoat it as much as you want. Like, oh, he's really just in the final tier, but he was the last one ranked in the final tier. Coaches that were ranked ahead of him, brand new, no experience as a head coach of the Carolina Panthers, Dave Canales. Same thing of Brian Callahan with the Tennessee Titans, Gerard Mayo with the New England Patriots, Antonio Pierce with the Las Vegas Raiders, Jonathan Gannon with the Arizona Cardinals, Mike McDonald of the Seattle Seahawks. A lot of first-time head coaches, not all first-time head coaches in that group, but a lot of first-time head coaches still being ranked or thought about or perceived as ahead of Dennis Allen on this list, which I think is like one of those things where you can kind of go, all right, if you wanted to cut a little bit of slack here, you could put them all above the guys that have never coached an NFL game in their entire careers thus far, because their career's been this long, itty tiny, teeny bitty. I think you can make that argument. But the thing that's also really interesting, and the way that I prefer to look at this, is you look at the head coaches on this list that are experienced and have experience as a head coach. The first veteran coach on this list, removing Jonathan Gannon because he's only had a year of head coaching experience, but looking at the veteran coaches on this list, Robert Saleh of the New York Jets, Brian Daboll of the New York Giants, Matt Eberflus of the Chicago Bears, Todd Bowles of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Can you make an argument for Dennis Allen ahead of those head coaches? That might be tough to do. Dennis Allen is the active head coach right now with the lowest win percentage historically. And so I get it. I understand why the ranking is going to be low on a guy like Dennis Allen, who needs an 11-6 season this year to cross a very critical threshold when it comes to NFL coaching, and that is the 400 win percentage mark. That is a mark where very few coaches cross into their 7th, 9th, 5th, 10th years of coaching. In fact, Aaron Schatz over at FTN did a really fantastic breakdown of those very percentages. And in the process, it kind of shines a light just on how important this season might be for head coach Dennis Allen. According to Aaron, you can see 10% of coaches did not make it 7 years with a record below 400. Just 7.3 made it 8 seasons. 6.0 made it 9, and just 1.4% made it 10. So crossing that 400%, or not 400%, but that 0.400 win percentage total is critical for Dennis Allen. But is it critical for him here in 2024? It's hard to say that it is. It doesn't seem that the New Orleans Saints look at Dennis Allen right now with the same sense of urgency as maybe some fans, analysts, and experts do. When they look at Dennis Allen, a lot of folks assume that many organizations would have already moved on from that head coach. In fact, we watched the Denver Broncos move on from Nathaniel Hackett just 1 year in. We've seen several head coaches moved on from before they even finish out their very first contracts within their first couple of years, things like that. Typically 2 years is the threshold. Typically 2 years with their quarterback is the threshold. This would be Dennis Allen's second year with the quarterback that he went out and pursued. So it would make sense if this ends up being the sort of final chance for Dennis Allen. But will that be the case? It doesn't seem that the New Orleans Saints are operating in that sort of reactionary measure. You almost wonder if they would move on from Derek Carr first and then give Dennis Allen an opportunity with a second year of the offense with a different quarterback before they would actually move on from Dennis Allen. I almost get that feeling as well. I think the New Orleans Saints like Dennis Allen. They like that he's an organization's coach. They like that he is a guy with institutional knowledge. But at what point do those things end up not being as important as winning? And so I think that has to be the question that has to be asked here in 2024. If missing the playoffs isn't the threshold, what is? Is it a 5-win season? Is it a 6-win season? At what point are there enough wins to say, give him 2025 as well? I think this could be a very important season for Dennis Allen. And for all intents and purposes, it's better for the New Orleans Saints. It's better for Dennis Allen if it works this year, because then there's no question marks going into 2025. It'll be the first clean offseason in 2025 if the New Orleans Saints at least make the playoffs here in 2024 in quite some time, pretty much since Drew Brees left. Once Drew Brees retired, then the question marks became about the quarterback. Once Sean Payton left, then it became about what are the New Orleans Saints really going to look like post Sean Payton. Then you've had the Pete Carmichael experience. Now you're going into the Clint Kubiak experience. Lots of question marks this offseason. If the Saints get to the playoffs this year and maintain as much of 2024 as they can going into 2025, with some key changes, veterans, aging, things like that, I understand all that, but it would be the first clean offseason the New Orleans Saints have had in some time, which could be a very welcome calm. But you have to earn that calm. It's not going to be handed to you. So the New Orleans Saints are very much in prove-it mode, especially when their head coach is being looked at as the worst head coach in the NFL by a lot of different experts. That's just simply where the New Orleans Saints are, and it is of their best benefit to prove those rankings wrong in 2024 to the tune of at least a playoff appearance. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at Demario Davis. Somebody I haven't gotten the opportunity to talk much about this offseason. I was asked an interesting question by former NFL scout Matt Williamson over on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Which of the 3 key veterans for the New Orleans Saints would be the most dire if regressing in 2024? And for me, that's all Demario Davis all day long. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at GameTime. There is no other ticketing service out there like GameTime that is simply obsessed with trying to give you the best deals for your tickets in every opportunity that they can, with deals all the way up to the beginning of your event, sometimes even an hour after the event. It is the go-to place for last-minute tickets, whether you're looking at basketball, baseball, football when it rolls back around, comedy, concerts, theater, and much more. Every event out there in your city, GameTime is going to have an offer for you between their flash sales and sponsored sales, as well as, of course, their seat views, where you can take all that transparency and bring that into your ticket buying experience, all in pricing and much more. You get to take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime today. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, family. Which of the New Orleans Saints defensive veterans would have the biggest detrimental impact if regressing in 2024? For me, it's all Demario Davis all day long. If Demario Davis is good, so too is the New Orleans Saints defense. We appreciate you very much, as always, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every day here on Locked On Saints. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today, their 24/7 stream program specifically to bring you the biggest stories from around the world of sports from the local experts that know the teams better than anyone else, and with all the yelling, shouting, screaming, and arguing. So make sure you go check them out today. Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I was asked a very interesting question by former NFL scout Matt Williamson when I was guest hosting over on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, which I'll be doing for the rest of the week if you want to come and check out some general NFL coverage with me and some others here on the network for the rest of the week. But I thought it was really interesting. We were talking about the New Orleans Saints defense, Dennis Allen's defense, which has been a big time part of their DNA and identity. One of the reasons why the New Orleans Saints do love Dennis Allen as a head coach is that the part of the ball that he focuses on hasn't really declined very much outside of the run game a little bit, but hopefully their hope is that they'll have that fixed a bit here in 2024. But that defense really started to come together back in 2017, yes, but really took its next step when Demario Davis was added in 2018. So the question that Matt asked me was, of the three key veterans for the New Orleans Saints defense, Cameron Jordan on the defensive line, Demario Davis in the middle of the defense at linebacker, and Tyrann Mathieu at safety. If two of those players or one of those players ends up having a regression in 2024, which one has the longest lasting impact or biggest impact on the New Orleans Saints defense? And I said I thought that it was Demario Davis. I think the Saints are already planning to force a regression for Cam Jordan. I assume that he'll see the least amount of career snaps that he has played on defense so far in his career this year. Not because he can't play those snaps or anything like that, but because there's a greater rotation of defensive ends than there has been in this New Orleans Saints defense in quite some time. Having a guy like Carl Granderson now step into a full-time role, 8.5 sacks last year, 14 tackles for a loss, 20 additional hits on the quarterback, just needs to be able to step up the consistency of his season in the middle of the year and step up the total pressures as well. But if he can get that going and continue that going in a way that maybe he himself told me that he hit a wall last season, right? And so can he keep himself from hitting that wall in 2024? Then you add in Chase Young. You might get some contributions from guys like Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey, who are going to be particularly inspired to produce this year, especially Peyton Turner, who's in a contract year with no fifth-year option plan to be picked up or no fifth-year option available to be picked up anymore. It seems like Cam Jordan is probably going to see the fewest snaps that he's seen and probably spend a little bit more time as a run stopper than a pass rusher in terms of those situations and things like that, while they maximize their situational pass rushers in Carl Granderson and Chase Young. And then Cam Jordan still being able to be a third defensive end in those NASCAR packages and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity there for him, but it feels like the regression is already being planned for when it comes to what the New Orleans Saints have already done on the defensive line. At safety, it feels like you've got two stud corners on the outside. You've had good safety play. You've got really good safety coaches. You've got a young guy in Jordan Howden, to where if maybe something happened with Tyrann Mathieu, a future Hall of Famer, in my opinion, and I think in many opinions, multiple Super Bowl rings, one of the best to play his position, all these other things, that you could still actually be okay at that spot. The Saints have made it work with down safety play, injured safety play before in the past because of what they can do out on the perimeter and putting their corners out on an island. So to me, it feels like the guy that ends up having the biggest impact as the tone setter for an entire defense, as the communicator for an entire defense, as the quarterback for an entire defense is Demario Davis. If Demario Davis were to take a step back in 2024, which I do not anticipate, to be clear, I think that has the bigger impact. I'm curious to know what you think. Do you think Tyrann Mathieu has a bigger impact than Demario Davis? Think Cam Jordan has a bigger impact than Demario Davis in terms of taking a step back? But I really feel like Demario Davis is the no-brainer here. He's the one that runs the defense. He's the one that makes sure that the defense is all in line. He's the one that communicates and makes those play calls. And don't get me wrong, safeties do a ton of communication all across the defense as well. But it just feels like Demario Davis is the lifeblood of the New Orleans Saints defense. He's the tone setter. He's the guy that brings the responsibilities. He's the guy that makes the checks, makes the calls, communicates, that trains everybody up, that helps, that leads the prayers, that, does it. He just is the guy. He's the one that does the pregame speeches, all these other things. It just feels very much like Demario Davis taking a step back would be the most detrimental of those three this season. In fact, I think the Saints could even manage if both Tyrann Mathieu and and Cam Jordan took a step back, as long as Demario Davis was still producing. I really believe that. Now, I do think that the Saints have kind of prepared themselves for some potential in the middle of the defense at linebacker as well. Adding Willie Gay, I think, goes a long way for this team. Okay, I want to be really clear about that too. The Saints kind of safeguarded themselves a little bit here. Pete Werner, if he's able to maintain the consistency, is going to be a very solid linebacker for a long time in the NFL. That was one of the things that we said about him when he got drafted. Who have a long career in the NFL as a kind of jack of all trades, kind of master of none type of linebacker. And so far, that has proven to be mostly true if he can maintain the consistency. The thing about Pete Werner is that he typically starts the season out hot and then has a little bit of a dip and then ends the season hot. And so if he's able to just kind of bridge that gap, just like we were talking about with Carl Granderson, then maybe you're feeling even better about Pete Werner too. But the addition of Willie Gay, I do think goes a long way. He can play any linebacker spot on the defensive side. He has the speed. He has playmaking ability. He can get sideline to sideline. He can rush the passer. He's a solid tackler. He can cover. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. So I think to an extent, the Saints could actually be okay at linebacker if things don't go as planned. But I think it's more than just being okay at linebacker. I think Demario Davis's impact is a ripple effect that's felt across the entire defense. And so you're not just having to make up for second level play, you're having to make up what a loss of production from Demario Davis means for the rest of the defense. So I think that Demario Davis is the one that would bring the most detriment if he were to see a regression. Will he see that regression? Boy, it sure is hard to project that he will, isn't it? Because he is still, several all-pro seasons in a row now at this point in his career since he started here in New Orleans, the quote-unquote latter part of his career. Remember, Demario Davis is a guy that talked about how he almost gave football up before he landed in New Orleans, and that once he landed in New Orleans, everything changed. He was rejuvenated at that point. So I can't project a step back for Demario Davis, but I wouldn't want to either, because I think that would be one of the most detrimental things to the New Orleans Saints being able to maintain defensive success in 2024 and beyond. Coming up next, I want to look at what it is that defines and makes up that New Orleans Saints defensive success. What is their mentality? What is the makeup of a New Orleans Saints defensive approach, and how do they make it work? We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints defense has been the backbone of its success pretty much since about 2017. But what is their identity? What is it that they do that works, and how do they make it work? That's what we're going to break down here as we revisit and get back to midweek fundamentals here on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we know that we're going to see a lot more motion. We know we're going to see a lot more play action as New Orleans Saints offense, 2 wide receiver sets, things like that. But I want to explain why I always harp on the idea of getting more yards after catch. I want to break down from a statistic standpoint how it is that can benefit an offense and how it would benefit getting Derek Carr back to his highest levels of production, looking back to 2019, 2020, some of his better seasons. We got some fantastic research thanks to our friend Aaron Schatz over at FTN that I want to bring in. And I'm hoping to have Aaron on the show next week as well to help break it down even further. But we're going to start to take a look at some of this stuff ahead of training camp in tomorrow's episode. So we got a little bit of a deep dive, nerdy Friday breakdown for you coming up on some yak conversations. We appreciate you very much for coming through. I miss doing this, and there's been so much to talk about over the course of the offseason so far that I wanted to make sure that I got back to it. Midweek Fundamentals. Midweek Fundamentals is a segment that I do in the middle of every week, either on Wednesday or Thursday, that kind of teaches a little bit about football, and specifically teaches it through the lens of what it is that the New Orleans Saints like to do. So what I wanted to do here was just do a general overview of what the New Orleans Saints defense is, how they get things done, what their DNA is, what their identity is on that side of the ball, and why they're so successful with it. This kind of counteracts a little bit of the fact that, like, we've been talking about the offense all season long with the offensive coaching staff change and stuff like that. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a reprieve from that, and it maybe give you a little something else to think about here when it comes to the defense. If you hate this, tell me, I'll never do it again. If you like it, though, let me know, because then I know to keep doing stuff like this. So what is it that makes the New Orleans Saints defense? I think that there are three critical things that define what a New Orleans Saints defense is. The first of which is press man coverage. The second of which is effort. And that really comes down to the defensive line in terms of the pass rush. And then the third and last thing is physicality, which I think really kind of sums up. You can put physicality in any defense, but I think physicality mixed in with these other couple of things is big for what it is that the New Orleans Saints defense really likes to brand itself on. So I also think that the New Orleans Saints defense, like, the New Orleans Saints defense wants to be the smartest guy in the room. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a part of what they succeed with sometimes. But I think that's a little bit too, like, metaphorical. So I don't want to dig into that. I want to dig into the things that are illustratable, that are demonstrable. So let's take a look at the press man side of this. The New Orleans Saints play press man coverage at a higher rate than any other team in the NFL. Does that mean that they only play press man coverage? No. Does that mean that they don't ever play zone coverage? Absolutely not. Does that mean that they play press man coverage 80% of the time? No, they probably play it a little bit more than 40%, closer to 50%. Like, that's probably really what you're looking for when it comes to a press man defense. But this is a big part of what it is that the New Orleans Saints do. Now, what do I mean by press man? So there's a big difference between playing man coverage and zone coverage. Man coverage is when you, as a cornerback or as a coverage player, are assigned to a player, and your responsibility is to make sure that dude doesn't catch the football, right? And that's in the passing game and all this other stuff. Zone coverage, you're assigned to an area of the field. You're keeping your eye on the quarterback. You're prowling your area of the field, and then you're covering things that come into your zones and then passing them off as they get past you and then enter another zone. So that's a big thing, right? Zone coverage, you're covering an area of the field. Man coverage, you're covering literally a person, right? You're trying to make sure that that guy doesn't catch the football. The idea between press man and off man comes down to what you do as a cornerback at the line of scrimmage. Press man, get your hands on that on that wide receiver. You're lined up directly in front of them. You're in their grill. You're trying to complicate their life from the snap. Off man coverage, you're playing off a little bit. You're letting them get a clean release, i.e. with no contact at the line of scrimmage. And then you're just kind of tracking the patterns, watching things develop in front of you. So now a little bit of the smartest guy in the room thing is that the Saints used to do a lot of pattern matching, right? So it was like the whole Rip Liz defense and stuff like that, to where you would have, an inside cover guy, an outside cover guy. One of them is assigned to the inside route, who might not necessarily be the player that's lined up directly in front of him. The other one's assigned to anything that's out breaking, going towards the sideline, stuff like that. Saints kind of do that. But as I've talked to more and more New Orleans Saints cornerbacks, they've kind of told me that they've moved away from that. And a lot of what they do is just playing straight up on an island man coverage. You stop that guy, right? And so I think that that is a big piece of their persona. And if you look at it, it's affected how they draft, how they team build, everything. Paulson Adebo was drafted because of his ability to play both man and zone, much like Marshawn Lattimore, but was also specifically deemed a fit because of the fact that he was comfortable playing that press man coverage system. Alontae Taylor, same thing. Kool-Aid McKinstry, same thing. When they went out and they signed Isaac Yiadom, same thing. Joe Woods had experience working with him. I believe it was in Denver, if I remember correctly. as did, a bunch of other players, a bunch of other people that overlap on this New Orleans Saints coaching staff with Dennis Allen and Marcus Robertson and all these other guys that have had some Denver experience or some Denver stops. They like the press man system. And so they have literally built their cornerback room to reflect that. So that is obviously a big thing. How do they make it work? That's how. They build their roster with the talent that is good in that area of the game. Surprise, surprise. But look, the other thing that they do is make sure that they're drafting guys that can also work in zone coverage, because you still have to play zone coverage in the NFL. So because of that, you need those guys to do that. And in fact, more times than not, you're going to be playing zone coverage than man coverage, even as a press man coverage team. So don't get it twisted. Doesn't mean that they're playing a majority of their snaps in man, or a vast majority of their snaps in man coverage, but it does mean that the Saints in particular play a lot of their snaps in man coverage. I mentioned effort. This for me goes down to the defensive line. The Saints have never really invested in the speed rushers. They're like the big Goliaths there, 280 plus, 270 plus, 6'4", 6'5", 6'7" defensive ends that don't necessarily always win on their initial move, on their initial pass rush. And that's because they have these fantastic cover corners that will force a quarterback to hold on to the football. So then it becomes about effort over on the defensive end side. The first pass rush move didn't work. What about the second effort? What about the third effort? Because typically the quarterback is forced to hold the ball that long. So you're looking for a defensive end and defensive pass rush style that's able to take advantage of that, but that doesn't have to rely on winning in the first 3 seconds. I think the Saints are changing a little bit of this though. Going out and getting a guy like Chase Young, who is a bit more of a speed threat on the edge. Finding the success with guys like Caden Ellis and Zach Bond as pass rushers over the past couple of years leading to that signing. Maybe a guy like Willie Gay can contribute there as well. So I think that's a big part of it. The Saints love second-level pressure as well, one of the leading teams of getting sacks with their second-level players, i.e. their linebackers. Last thing that I mentioned was physicality. And again, this goes across many different defenses. Every defense wants to be physical. The difference is that the New Orleans Saints achieve it. Sometimes they get penalties because of it. You live and you die by it. It's okay. It's fine. Some of those you'll take. And the Saints coaches have even talked about that. Joe Woods talked about that before. Where sometimes it's just like, yo, you're out there being physical. You're playing your game. You got a flag. Look, sometimes you just have to live with that. So I think physicality sets the tone by, but these other things, press man coverage, second level pressure, effort. These things set the tone for the physicality that this New Orleans Saints defense wants, which I think is kind of that. What was it in the Powerpuff Girls? Was Chemical X or whatever? They got sprinkled in the sweet spice and everything nice. That's the Chemical X that gets it all done. So for me, looking at the New Orleans Saints and trying to put together the formula of what it is that makes a New Orleans Saints defense a New Orleans Saints defense, those are the things: press man coverage, physical nature, effort, which comes down to that defensive line as well as second level pressure. I think you get all three of those things and you do them well. That's a pretty good Dennis Allen defense for you. There's other things, don't get me wrong, but those to me are the core things. We'll look at more next week. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget to come back tomorrow as we take a look at yards after catch and why they can be big in realizing the best of Derek Carr and realizing the best of this New Orleans Saints offense. We got some data to back it all up. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison. DeJounte Murray had his first press conference with the team and absolutely won everybody in New Orleans over. Definitely want to go and check that out, as well as all the great things happening over with LSU baseball right now. Don't miss Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you. What was it in the Powerpuff Girls? Was Chemical X or whatever? They got sprinkled in the sweet spice and everything nice. That's the Chemical X